Hey friends, welcome to Nina's Notes, where we now have audio and video. It's episode 150, and it also is the 3-year anniversary of Nina's Notes. I really started this newsletter to translate complex science into something that everyone can understand. And over the last 3 years, it's really evolved. We've explored everything from sleep to stress to psychedelics to longevity. And I now have 3,000 of you reading Nina's notes. So thank you to every one of you that is here, whether you've been here from episode 1 till just recently. I'm really glad you found it. And I hope you're really enjoying Nina's notes. As I go into year 4, I'm going to be expanding not just my reporting on health and science news, but also going more in depth with more conversations with experts and giving a lot more of my opinion of all these different types of technologies. Thank you so much for reading, for listening, for telling me that this work matters. It really means the world to me. So, sending you a lot of love from Lisbon. Thank you so much for reading Nina's notes. And now we're going to go into number 150, which is Can Psychedelics Slow or Reverse Aging? This is a written version of a talk that I gave in Lisbon at a space called Origin of Everywhere on Tuesday, September 16th. First off, for some of you who might be joining in now, you might not know who I am. So I'm going to give a brief intro. I'm Dr. Nina Patrick. I have a PhD in pharmaceutical science. And in my PhD, I studied epigenetics, which is the code that sits on top of your DNA. Your DNA is fixed. It does not change. That's your genome. But on top of your DNA, there are little modifications like small methylation groups that can come on and come off based on different environmental factors. And this has been linked with longevity. Also in my PhD, I did a very small project where I looked at the neurotoxicity of MDMA, or as you might know it as ecstasy, on the rat brain. And so this is really where my love and passion for longevity and psychedelics started. I also obviously write Nina's notes, and I'm a biotech entrepreneur. I started my first company in Berlin in 2019, which was a diagnostics company. And now I organize a longevity community here in Lisbon called Longevity Wednesdays. We're a community for professionals who work in longevity, but we also do talks and panels and different types of meetups for people who are interested in longevity and that want to come by. And they always happen on Wednesdays. So now on to 150, can psychedelics reverse or slow down aging? So, what if a single mushroom could not only change your mind, but slow down how your body ages? Psychedelics, we know, have mostly been studied for mental health, but more recently, they're starting to be studied for what they can offer in the biology of aging. First, I want to give you a brief overview into longevity science. There are 12 hallmarks of aging, and these are basically the processes that are quite standardized along aging and how your body breaks down. When I was in my PhD, we only had 9 hallmarks of aging. So in the last 10 years, we've added 3 more to this family of hallmarks of aging. I don't want to walk you through all 12 because that would be quite exhausting, but I'll group them into 3 groups. And the first is cellular housekeeping failures. What this means is when the processes in your cells that keep everything running as normal start to break down. So your DNA could have more damages because the system that repairs the DNA is not working as well as it used to. Also, on our chromosomes, we have these end caps called telomeres. Think of them as the plastic cap on the end of a shoelace that's going to protect that shoelace. And over time, that plastic cap can get cracks and start to break, and the lace will start to fray. As you age, your telomeres start to degrade. And this is due to reproducing your genome and many normal factors. So that's another hallmark of aging, is telomere shortening. And lastly, your cells generally just forget how to take out the trash. And when these 3 things go wrong, the system just clogs up and can't function as normal. The second category of the hallmarks of aging is communication breakdown. Your cells are constantly talking to each other. They're like neighbors. They want to talk about the day. They want to talk about what's going on. But over time, these messages start to get garbled. Think of when you played telephone as a kid and you're sending a message from one to your neighbor and then another neighbor and then another neighbor and another neighbor. And eventually the message that you sent is not what was received way at the other end of the room. And so this also can cause an increase of inflammation. This can decrease just natural nutrient sensing within the cell. So the cells are not communicating properly. They don't know what's available around them. And it's basically like your group chat got hacked, more or less. And then the last category of hallmarks of aging are runaway processes. And this is when your cells turn into a state that we call senescence. Sometimes we call them zombie cells. These are cells that are hanging around, but they've really lost their primary function. You can think of them as bad party guests who refuse to leave the party. They're just taking up space. They're getting in the way for you to allow you to clean up your house after the party, and they just won't leave. When you have a lot of senescent cells around, this also increases inflammation. And another runaway process is that your mitochondria, and you all remember this from biology class, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And the powerhouse is not functioning at its full capacity anymore. And also that powerhouse is charging up batteries, which are just not holding their full charge anymore. So when we put these three categories together, we get the gradual decline that we call aging. So now let me connect the dots. Mental health and aging are both deeply intertwined. We know that depression, chronic stress, and anxiety don't just affect your mind, but they also speed up the hallmarks of aging. This means they lead to the shortening of your telomeres, they drive inflammation, they increase chronic stress, and this all leaves an emotional fingerprint on your body. And psychedelics have some of the strongest evidence we've seen for treating mood disorders like depression and anxiety. And what really excites me about psychedelics is that they don't just improve mood, but they may also touch multiple of these hallmarks of aging at the same time. So our next question is really, if psychedelics can improve mental health, could they also slow down or reverse the biological aging process? And this is exactly what researchers are starting to look at. So before I take you into cellular aging studies, I want to talk about something that's very human to all of us and something you probably have heard about the psychedelic studies around is around trauma. And trauma isn't just psychological, it's also leaving a biological imprint and impacting your body. People with a history of trauma show higher inflammation, they show chronic stress, shortened telomeres, and a higher risk of diseases of aging like heart disease, diabetes, and dementia. Some researchers even say that trauma can age your body by years or even decades. And recently, psychedelics have been making headlines on their ability to help people process trauma. You may have heard about the MAPS studies with MDMA, MDMA-assisted therapy, and PTSD, decreasing participants' PTSD. You've also maybe heard about psilocybin being used to treat depression, also being used to treat end-of-life anxiety. These are all ongoing clinical trials that are being investigated for psychedelics against trauma. And what we're seeing is that psychedelics don't just shift mood, but it gives us a chance to really rewire your body's entire stress response. Trauma is like having an alarm bell going off constantly. And you have increased cortisol, you have increased hypervigilance, you have increased adrenaline, and this wears your body down over time. And when psychedelics help people address that alarm, it allows them to really reset their nervous system. And when you reset the nervous system, the entire body benefits. Your sleep will improve, your inflammation drops, and your immune system will get boosted. Those are not small things. These are some of the strongest predictors of long-term health and longevity. So when we ask, can psychedelics slow down or reverse aging, part of the answer is something that we already know, that we really have concrete evidence on, which is that by helping release trauma, we're helping our body heal. Another reason psychedelics are so interesting for aging is because of neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is your brain's innate ability to rewire itself. Your brain has the ability to grow new connections, strengthen pathways, and even repair itself after damage. But as we age, that plasticity declines. So learning becomes harder, recovery after injury is slower, and in diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, neurons literally lose their ability to adapt. But psychedelics allow us to flip that switch back on. In lab studies, psychedelics have been shown to increase the density of and the size of dendritic spines. This is so if my arm is a neuron and this is your axon, down here you have a synapse, so that's kind of where it's sending out signals. At the top, you have a majority of the cell body, and then you have these dendrites. And psychedelics have been known to strengthen these. They can form new connections with other dendrites and even grow towards each other. It's completely fascinating. This can happen just after one single dose of a psychedelic. And human studies also back this up. There was a microdosing study that showed an increase in an enzyme called BDNF, that's brain derived neurotropic factor. Because in human studies, we can't go into your brain and take a little bit out to see if your dendrites are growing. That would be unethical and cruel. And we have to look at a biomarker that would indicate that your neurons are growing, and this is BDNF. So after microdosing psilocybin, humans saw an increase in BDNF in blood samples. Another study was done recently by Paul Stamets in 2022. Participants that were over 55 took a single dose of psilocybin and then did a finger tapping exercise. And finger tapping is a qualified exercise for assessing cognitive function. And participants showed an increase in their finger tapping ability, which means they had an increase in motor cognitive function after their dose of psilocybin. So why does this matter for longevity? Because neuroplasticity is really a gateway. And if we can keep the brain flexible, adaptive, and connected, then we can keep the brain resilient against aging itself. And this means we could preserve memory, we can preserve cognition, and we can even preserve motor function later in life. Now, I want to share with you a study about psychedelics and Parkinson's disease. So Parkinson's disease affects 10 million people globally. It's categorized as a movement disorder, which we all know that Parkinson's disease leads to tremors, a shuffling gait, and much slower movements. But it also can affect someone's mood. Depression and anxiety can show up years or even decades in a Parkinson's patient before they have the motor symptoms. Medications like L-Dopa and what's used to suppress the motor symptoms really don't address the mental health symptoms that come along with Parkinson's. Some Parkinson's patients will be prescribed antidepressants, but typically they don't work in Parkinson's patients. So a team at UCSF asked, could psilocybin help patients who experience debilitating mood dysfunction alongside their motor symptoms? And these results were published on April 9th, 2025 in the journal Neuropsychopharmacology. So this just happened. This happened in April. That's just about 4 months ago that this study was published, and it's absolutely fascinating. So they ran a pilot study with 12 patients that had mild to moderate Parkinson's disease. And the patients received psychotherapy before and after the treatment, and they either received a lower dose or a higher dose of psilocybin, which was either 10 milligrams or 25 milligrams. The results showed significantly improved mood and cognition. But what was most surprising about this study is that the single dose of psilocybin improved their motor control symptoms up to 3 months later. There are no treatments that can actually address and slow down Parkinson's disease. So this is absolutely groundbreaking. So why did this happen? We don't know exactly, but there are theories. And one theory is that if you feel better, if your mood is improved, you will move more, you'll socialize more, and your whole body generally works better. But there's also more of the mechanics of addressing maybe some of these hallmarks of aging, which is that psilocybin reduces inflammation, it promotes neuroplasticity, and it might even help the brain repair. So what the researchers at UCSF found is that psilocybin is not just treating the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, but the results hint at disease modification, potentially slowing or even reversing neurodegeneration. This pilot study has now led to a randomized controlled trial, which will take place at UCSF and Yale. There will be 100 participants, and they will also now incorporate some neuroimaging, other advanced tools to understand how psilocybin is impacting inflammation and neuroplasticity. And they also will use some non-invasive brain stimulation like transcranial magnetic stimulation. So cool. So if psilocybin can shift the trajectory of Parkinson's disease, what can it, and it can also help resolve trauma, it can enhance neuroplasticity. What about addressing aging itself? So I want to talk about a study that was published in July 2025. So right now it's September. So this was just July, August. This was just 3 months ago, by a team at Emory and Baylor universities. And they published the first evidence that psilocybin can actually extend lifespan in both cells and animals. And so what they did is that they took lung cells and they treated the lung cells with psilocin. Psilocin is the active metabolite of psilocybin. They needed to use this active metabolite because cells don't have a metabolism like we do. They don't have a stomach. So you need to give them the active reagent rather than giving them psilocybin, which is called a prodrug, which is the drug before its active metabolite. So they treat the cells with a low dose and also a high dose of psilocin. And at the low dose, they saw a 30% extension of life in those lung cells. And at the higher dose, they found a 57% lifespan extension in the lung cells. What happens mechanistically is that the telomeres stay intact, DNA damage is lower, oxidative stress is lower, and it increased the expression of a gene called SIRT1. And SIRT1 is really kind of this master regulator of aging. And also, psilocin delayed hitting the senescent state. So this is when healthy cells turn into zombie cells. This wasn't occurring in that group of cells that they tested. Now, cell studies are exciting, but cells are less complex than animals and humans. And then they did an experiment in mice studies. And this is where the results get really exciting. Researchers treated 19-month-old female mice. This is the equivalent to a 60 to 65-year-old human. And they gave them monthly doses of psilocybin for 10 months. And they found an 80% increase in survival of the mice that were given psilocybin versus a 50% survival rate of the mice that were given placebo. The mice even looked more youthful with improved fur quality and less graying. So mice also go gray in their old age, and they saw reduced graying of the fur. Overall survival also improved by 30% compared to the experimental group, which is a significant increase. So what could be happening at the molecular level? Mechanistically, it comes down to the same hallmarks of aging, which I've already talked about before. So the telomeres are not being shortened. There are antioxidant defenses. There's better DNA repair. There's this upregulation of SIRT1. And this really validates a hypothesis that was proposed in 2020, which was called the psilocybin telomere hypothesis. And this theory suggested that psilocybin's clinical benefits across depression, anxiety, and neurodegenerative disease might stem from its impact on the biological aging markers. And so the connection makes sense. Chronic stress, depression, anxiety, they're all associated with this accelerated telomere shortening and premature aging. And psilocybin may be impacting mental health by improving these hallmarks of aging. So it doesn't just shift mood, it will shift the molecular clock. And some scientists are even starting to call psilocybin a geroprotective psychedelic because it simultaneously addresses mental health, neurodegeneration, and cellular aging. And I've been talking a lot about psilocybin in particular, while other psychedelics have also been looked at for mental health and are beginning to be looked at for other diseases. But psilocybin is particularly interesting because the FDA assigned it as a breakthrough therapy for depression. And this means, as it's a breakthrough therapy, that more patients can get it. It's also much easier for researchers to do studies on not just depression, but on other diseases, such as neurodegenerative diseases or other mental health disorders. So let's talk about psychedelics as aging medicines. It's something we've always thought about as being a mind medicine, but it's turning out that psychedelics are whole body medicines, which can alter several fundamental processes of aging. To return to the opening question of can psychedelics slow or reverse aging, the answer is maybe. We're really at the beginning of this research, but it is possible that a single compound could help with mental health, help repair the brain, and help slow aging. And that's just really too important to ignore. Now for the book of the week. This week, I read Killer Potential, which was awesome. I was totally captivated from basically page one. It's the story of two women who they flee a crime scene after an SAT tutor arrives at a house and finds the parents of her student dead, brutally murdered. And these two women go on the run, and it's this really unsettling murder mystery that turns into a friendship and unsuspecting romance. And it ends with some serious Parasite vibes. There was a huge twist. I did not see it coming, but I will 100% recommend this book as you get ready for spooky season. Now, check this out. Humans are more genetically close to fungi than they are to plants. I saw this circulating as a viral post on Instagram. I had to fact check it. And it turns out it is true. Mushrooms are more closely related to animals than they are to plants. There are a lot of overlapping characteristics between fungi and animals that plants do not have, such as mushrooms and animals both store glycogen while plants store energy as starch. And both fungi and insects use polysaccharide chitin to build cell walls, while plants use cellulose. And mushrooms, like humans, produce vitamin D when exposed to sunlight. And Paul Stamets, a mycologist and author, told WBUR in an interview that humans share nearly 50% of their DNA with fungi. Thanks so much for watching, listening to the first ever Nina's Notes audio and video recording. If you want to check out more, you can check out my podcast, which is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe to the newsletter at ninasnotes.xyz, and I'll see you next week.